Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, then hi, hello, my name is Arya and welcome to my channel. So, today I'm gonna be talking about the most disappointing and the worst books that I read in 2020. And these are a lot, which means that my 2020 reading year was not that great, and honestly, it didn't feel great. So I guess this whole video is gonna reflect upon that. Before I get into the books, I just wanted to say that these are just my own opinions and everyone's allowed to have their own opinions, and if any one of these are one of your favorite books ever, then I'm very sorry, but they were just not for me, and that's perfectly fine. So I'm gonna start from the disappointing books, and I'm gonna start from the least disappointing to the most disappointing, and then from the least worst to the worst of the worst. I think that makes sense. Most of the books from the disappointing category, I just feel like they're disappointing because they were just not what I expected. Like, it's not the book's fault, it's probably just me having way higher expectations or just expecting something else from the book but getting something entirely different. So this is the case with most of these, but anyhow, enough rambling, let's just get into the books. So the least disappointing out of the bunch is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid, and I'm not even sure how to describe this, to be quite honest. It's just a weird book, and it's supposed to be like thrillery horror type of situation, and I'm not even gonna describe what it is because it's a really short book. But the reason I am disappointed in it is because it was nowhere nearly as horror as I was expecting it to be. And before I even started the book, well, the audiobook, I listened to it. So before I even did that, I read a bunch of reviews, and a lot of people said that they were so creeped out and they were so scared and they had chills running down their spines while listening or reading to the book. And while I was listening to it, I was like, where's the scary parts? So I don't think this is the book's fault. I'd say this is more of a me problem. Maybe I just need a bit more, I don't know, something more to get scared or just to like feel any sort of horror feeling. I don't know, but anyhow, this is the situation with this one. I'd still recommend it, even though it was quite disappointing for me. I don't think it's a bad book. And frankly, that is the case with most of these. Like, they're not bad books, they're just not for me. Next up, I have The Deathless Girls by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. This one, again, same thing. The story was just not what I was expecting. This is marketed as like a Dracula retelling, but you're following Dracula's wives instead of Dracula himself or whomever else. And while this is like, I guess, sort of that, it's not really. You only get like the whole Dracula aspect towards the later half of the book, towards the ending. And I mean, while this is not like such a big book, I still expected it to be like vampiric. It really wasn't that. Sure, this is not a bad book. I did enjoy it for what it was, but it disappointed me because it was not what I wanted and it was not what I expected. Instead, what I got is just like, you basically follow this traveler girl and she basically gets enslaved together with her twin sister or her sister, I don't remember at this point, and they're taken as slaves to go and serve the boyar, as it said in the book. And that basically means like a baron or just like some lord of sorts, and you basically like follow them and stuff starts happening. And the stuff that was happening was just not what I wanted. And that's about it. Also, one highlight of this book is that it's sapphic. And another thing is that you don't really get traveler main characters in books. I'm not sure how accurate this representation is, but I still appreciate it nonetheless. The next book I have here is The Sisters Grimm by Mena van Praag. Not sure if that's how you say the name, but I'm just gonna go with it. This one is exactly the same case, literally just not a bad book, but not what I wanted from it and not what I expected and not what it's marketed as. Again, this is like a strange plot that I'm not entirely sure how to explain without spoiling anything, because I like to keep things vague, because most of synopses, they like spoil the first entire half of the book, and I'm like, what's the point of me reading this book if you're gonna spoil half of it, you know? So I just want to like keep it vague but still interesting and captivating. Basically, in this book you follow four girls, I believe. Pretty sure it's four. I've read this a while ago and it doesn't say in the synopsis. And basically, they're having these like dreams about this otherworldly place where they have like magical abilities and they're sort of elemental, and not sort of, they're elemental. And when they wake up, they do not remember having that dream. Like they do not remember the dream, but they have a lingering feeling. And strange things keep happening, and like they're all connected between them. And I'm just gonna leave it at that. So it sounds like it's gonna be something like really whimsical and like magical and ethereal, and I think you know where I'm getting at with these adjectives here. And while it did have a bit of that, it was just meh. It fell flat for me, and it was quite slow, and a lot of the times nothing was really happening in the book. And the ending was just also underwhelming, and the whole book was just underwhelming. And because of that, it disappointed me. One thing I did really like about this book is the writing. The writing is genuinely lyrical, but what I did notice is that it was very lyrical in the beginning, but then as the story went on, it kind of lost its lyricism. I don't even know if that's a word, but it is now. Yeah, the writing just became more basic. I don't know if this is just me, or if it's the book, or if it's the writing, or if I just lost interest in it. I don't know. That whole lyricism getting less and less throughout the book also adds to the whole disappointment. So, yeah, moving on. The next book I have here is a very controversial one. So, if this is your favorite book ever, which it most likely is, then I'm sorry, but this was just not for me, and I genuinely don't see why people are so crazy about this one. And the book that I'm talking about is Daisy Jones and the Six. It's not that I didn't like this book, I just had such high expectations, because everyone, like every single person on the planet that I've heard of that has read this book, has loved this book. And that just set my expectations like sky high, and they were not met. Hence, it is in the disappointing pile of books. But with that being said, I feel like even if I didn't have the high expectations, I still would have been somewhat disappointed in this, because honestly, this story is just underwhelming. I genuinely do not see why people like this. It's like, okay, it's just a story about a fictional band and some unrequited love story, and that's about it. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't get it. It does nothing special for me. And I did listen to this as an audio because everyone recommended the audio, and it was an okay audio. It's a good audiobook, but again, it just didn't, I could not care. Honestly, I could not care about the characters. I guess this is just maybe not for my taste, but I was not invested in this. I couldn't care less, and that's essentially all I have to say about this. It just wasn't for me. And I think this book also made me realize that celebrity stories and famous people stories are just not for me. Like, they just annoy me for some reason. And so I don't think I will be reading anything featuring like celebrities or famous people or in like paparazzi and stuff and all of that. Unless it's like maybe something that really interests me and it sounds exceptional, but otherwise, no. Honestly, I'm really sad that I didn't like this as much as everyone else because I mean, I want to join everybody and their love for this book, but I just cannot. The next book I have here is another case of just not what I expected, and this is Meat Market by Juno Dawson. So, the problem with this book for me is that I thought it was gonna give me like the raw truth about the modeling industry because it's about the modeling industry, and it was gonna talk about beauty standards and how the model industry is really bad and creates these unrealistic beauty standards and all of that stuff. And while it did do some of that, I don't think that that was at the core of the story. Like, it is a pretty big part of the story, but the reason I didn't like this book and it disappointed me is that it's just too childish for me. I guess maybe I wasn't the right age group for this book, and I cannot fault the book for that. I can only fault myself because probably should have read this sooner. Another thing that made me dislike this book is the main character and just the characters in general. Like, they're also whiny and childish and just too teenagers for me. That whole mindset just annoys the hell out of me. So this, not for me. I'd say this is like perfect for 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, perfect. But for me, no. Yeah, I don't feel like I gained anything from this book. It didn't teach me anything I didn't already know, and it just didn't give me anything. And aside from that, the story also did not compel me in any way, and it was just disappointing overall. The next book is a bit of a controversial one as well because I know a lot of people like this book, and this is The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. I have since unhauled this book because I do not feel compelled to keep it because I didn't like it. So this book is basically described as a Slytherin romance story, and essentially the main character wants to woo and seduce the king so he will get married to her, and then she will kill him and become queen. And what I did not like about this book are a great many things. So first things off, there is zero world building, like none whatsoever. For a fantasy story, there is no world building at all, none. And while world building is not too important for me when I generally read books, a complete lack of it isn't good. So that is one thing. Second thing, there is barely any magic in this. Like, there's just a smidgen of magic, which is again very disappointing because this is supposed to be a fantasy book, and I don't know if I have the wrong definition of fantasy in my head, but that definition does not apply to this book. So another thing I did not like from the book is the main character. I absolutely despise her. Oh my god, such a god-awful character. I know she's supposed to be like this badass woman and confident and sure of herself, and she goes after what she wants, and she's like super sex positive, and I do appreciate the sex positivity in this book, but aside from that, this character was just god awful. Like, she's so mean and rude and selfish, like to a whole other level, and just no. And that brings me to like another thing that I didn't like is that a lot of the scenes and conversations from the book were quite unrealistic because, for example, she would be talking to the king trying to seduce him, and she would say or do something that in other cases in the book the king would order that other person to be killed, decapitated, beheaded, thrown in the dungeons, And when the main character, Alessandra, I believe is her name, when she did something like that, then the king would be like, oh, it's perfectly fine. And that is just like, what? Excuse me? Did you just see what happened? Like, were you even there? It doesn't make any sense. Like, what is this bias? That whole thing just brought me out of the story, and yeah, just no. And also, there's this like plot twist at the end, and obviously I'm not gonna say what it is, but I feel like this plot twist just came out of nowhere. Like, there's usually some hint or like some sort of build up or something, but I feel like this was just thrown in there at the end just to create a little bit more drama before the book completely wraps up, and it's stuck out like it didn't even belong there. I could tell that it was just put in there for the purpose of creating some semblance of a plot in this book, and the plot twist itself wasn't even that great. And yeah, just no, I don't see why people like this, and I don't know how other people don't notice these things. Like, I generally don't notice bad things in books because I do not read critically at all, but this was just way too noticeable even for me. I truly wanted to like it. I was so excited for this book and I thought I was gonna love it, but then I read it and no. So down to the last two most disappointing books that I read in 2020. Second to last is Stardaughter by Shweta Takrar. This one I'm so sad that I didn't like as much as I wanted to. Oh my god, I cannot express how excited I was for this book, and not because there was hype for it or anything like that. I was just truly excited for it. Like, after reading the synopsis, I thought I was gonna love this book, and I did, hence why it's on this list. So this book is inspired by Hindu mythology, and our main character, oh my god, what's her name? Sheetal. Yeah, our main character, Sheetal, she is half star and half mortal, and she accidentally hurts her dad because her powers sort of explode, and due to that, she has to travel to the star courts and enter a competition which will allow her to save her father if she wins. That sounds like great fun, doesn't it? Well, it was somewhat, but at the same time, it was disappointing because, one, not nearly as much culture and mythology aspects to it as I expected. I expected way more. I expected way more of the courts and how they work and court politics and all of that. I don't think I got enough of them in the book. Another thing I didn't like, the romance. Oh my sweet Jesus. That romance was so unnecessary. So unnecessary and so cringy, and it didn't need to be in here. Why add romance in every single book? Like, it doesn't have to be here. Every time I read bits of that romance happening, I would just cringe and roll my eyes, and I could not wait until it was over so we would move on with the actual plot itself. Obviously, that lessens my enjoyment of the book, which is not something that you would want. Together with the romance comes the third thing that I didn't really like about this book, and that is the whole teenage aspect of it, and like the main character as well did not like her because she was kind of flat. She didn't have much of a personality and she did not come through. Just, she didn't shine as a star is supposed to shine because she's like half star. She just felt basic to me, and it was like the only thing she cared about was the romance, like the dude, the love prospect. And I'm like, girl, you have so many problems on your head and this is what you focus on? Seriously? And she was just too overdramatic and too whiny. All of these together just created this childishness about the characters and the story that I feel like brought the whole book to a lower level. I feel like this book had such high potential. It could have done such great things, especially with the Hindu mythology, which is not something you see every day, by the way, in books. And it could have been amazing, but in my opinion, it was not. And I was greatly disappointed by it. Like, I'm so sad that I didn't enjoy it because I wanted to so badly. And this is like a gorgeous book, but I feel like the insides did not match the gorgeousness of the outside. So the weather got super gloomy all of a sudden, and I'm gonna try and speed things up a bit so it doesn't get too dark in the video. And yeah, there's not too many books now, so I think we're gonna be good. So on to the most disappointing book of 2020, probably ever. We got The Lost Book of the White by Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. Unbelievably disappointing. If you watch my channel consistently, you would know that I really love Cassandra Clare's books. I genuinely do. I love all of her books. And going into this, I obviously expected to love it as much as every other book of hers, but let me tell you, that did not happen. This book was just unnecessary and boring. So boring. Oh my god. Nothing was really happening throughout the story. Like, obviously there's a plot and things were happening, but it felt like nothing was happening and everything was just on one note. Like, it didn't have ups and downs, and I don't know, it was just the definition of meh. It took me a really long time to get through this, considering that this is not such a big book, and considering that this is a Cassandra Clare book, which I love and I usually fly through. This, no. I had no desire to pick it up and continue reading with the story because I was just frankly bored, and that is not a good feeling. It did not excite me, it did not keep me at the edge of my seat like all of her other books do, and no, just no. And I'm very saddened by the fact that this was bad, but I guess it had to happen. Out of all of the books that she's written, I guess there had to be one that I didn't like, because otherwise it would have been too good to be true, you know? So here it is. This is the one Cassandra Clare that I'm not a fan of. There you have it, folks. So now moving on to the worst of the worst, which are not too many. There's only 3 of them that were just truly bad. One of them is The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer. I heard a lot of good things about this author and a lot of good things about this book, but I don't get what people see in this book. I really did not like this book for 2 main reasons. Actually 3. Make it 3. So, reason number 1. This is basic white feminism. There's no inclusivity or diverse feminism whatsoever. It just focuses on rich white women and their problems. And that is not the kind of feminism I support, and that's not even feminism by definition. So that is one thing. The other thing is that there is no plot to this. I just don't see it. Nothing was happening. And the few things that were happening, I did not care at all. And that brings me to the third point, which is the fact that this book was so boring. I was so bored. I have never been more bored while reading a book. Bored is not a good feeling. Books are not supposed to bore you to death. And this one did. It nearly killed me with boredom. So, not a good book. Would not recommend unless you have like endless amounts of patience and you want to read this, or you just love the author and you like her writing. Sure. Other than that, I don't see why anyone would want to read this, and I would not recommend at all. Though there is one more book by the author that I do want to read, so I will give that one a try at some point in life. And if that one is as big of a bust as this one, then we'll definitely not be reading from Meg Wolitzer anymore. unfortunately. The second to last worst book ever, or at least in 2020, let's not be overdramatic here, is The Sin Eater by Megan Campisi. And this one I requested as an ARC from NetGalley, which should tell you how excited I was for this book and how much I wanted to read it. And it was torture. Reading this book was pure torture, and I don't know why I cannot just DNF books. I don't know what's stopping me from DNFing books, but this one I should have DNF'd. Oh my god. It was like walking through mud. That is what reading this book felt like. Again, unbelievably boring. Nothing was happening, and there was nothing exciting or interesting about the book. I'm gonna tell you what the story is about because it sounds kind of cool. So, essentially, you follow the main character whose name I do not remember at this point and I do not need to remember. But you follow the main character and she is caught stealing and therefore punished to be a sin eater for the rest of her life. And sin eaters are people who eat food representing the sins of people who have died. And due to that, they are considered dirty and unworthy, and they should not be touched or spoken to. And basically, sin eaters are not supposed to speak or be in contact with anyone else because they carry all of the sins that they have eaten with them so that people will go into heaven sinless. What happens at the start of the book is that she becomes the apprentice to the older sin eater in town, and then something happens and the older sin eater is thrown into the dungeons. And the younger sin eater, our main character, she tries to save her, but at the same time there's something happening in the royal court palace and she tries to uncover that mystery as well. And she just goes around eating people's sins and spying on nobles in the court. And that's about it. That is the entirety of the story. Just spying on people and eating food representing sins and hearing people's sins, and that is the whole thing. Nothing was happening in this book. I maybe would have excused the lack of plot and story and interesting things if the writing was any good, but the writing was just basic. There was nothing to it that would beautify the story in any way. So that just made it even worse. And there's this like sort of a plot twist at the end that wasn't even that interesting, and you kind of see it coming anyways, and the whole thing was just pointless. The whole book is pointless. There is no plot, nothing interesting. It's boring, and there's no essence to it. Nothing, completely lacking. And therefore, it is the second worst book that I have read in 2020. And I'm pissed off that I wasted my time reading this book. And now I am down to the worst book. And this is not only the worst book that I read in 2020, but I think this is the worst book ever. And again, this might be controversial because a lot of people love this book and I do not understand why. It is beyond my cognitive capabilities. And the book that I'm talking about is none other than Dracula. I'm sorry if you love this book, but no. Why? Why? I don't think I have ever read a more boring book in my life. Obviously, Dracula is very known and it's considered a classic for a reason, which I do not see, by the way. And a lot of people love it. And you would tend to go into this with certain expectations and expecting vampirism and gothic atmosphere and eerie horror vibes. Yeah? None of those. None of those. Nada. Everything that I expected to get from this book, I didn't get any of it. Hence why I don't like it. I do not like this book at all. It lacked anything that would make it a vampire classic book. I don't get it. It's just following a bunch of dudes trying to kill this vampire and failing miserably, and just there's like excerpts of their diaries, and I don't care. I do not care. Could not get into it, could not care about any of the characters. It always felt like they went on tangents that were not related to the story, and I would be like, why are we even going through this? What is the point of discussing this right now? And the writing was not something I liked either. The writing was very dull and dry to me, and I listened to this as an audio, and it was the only way I could have ever finished this book, because reading it with my own two eyeballs would have been impossible. And that is the tea of the day. Not for me. I do love vampires. I am a sucker for vampires, but this, no. I'd say if you want to read this, I would recommend you go and watch that old black and white movie of Dracula with the guy named Bela Lugosi that plays Dracula. It's basically the same story but much better because it's also visual. If you want to see what this is, just go watch that movie and don't waste your time on this. And I'm just gonna leave it at that. And those were the most disappointing and the worst books I read in 2020. I don't know why, for some reason, it's easier for me to bash books and talk about the negatives rather than talk about the positives of books that I love. Like, you could give me a book that I absolutely loved and ask me to tell you why I loved it, and I just couldn't tell you. But if you ask me to describe why I did not like a book, the list is never ending. I guess it's just easier to talk about things I don't like rather than the things that I like. Who knows? Anyhow, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Again, many apologies to the people that like any of these books. They're just not for me, and it's absolutely fine if you like these books. Everyone to their own. And yeah. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will see you in another video, hopefully soon.